All right, let's talk about the brand of Linux. So this whole thing started when I was listening to this audiobook called Start With Why by Simon something. Sinek?
Simon
Simon
Sinek.
Sinek or something like that. And I was listening to it while I was driving in the car. And he talks a lot about Apple. He put it in a way that I crystallized the thought I had about Linux going through all these years, where there was a part of me that was like, hoorah, we should get everyone to use Linux. But slowly over the years, I realized more and more that you can get some people to use Linux, but you can't get everyone to use Linux. In the book Start With Why, said this thing where a person can rationalize why they do something.
But why?
You can go to an Apple user and ask them, why do you use Apple? They can say, oh, I like how stable it is, I like the UI, I like all that. But the part of your mind that actually makes decisions isn't a part of your mind that really talks. So it's not, you're not explaining why you like it.
It's just doing what brains do, creating a story that explains its past actions to its current self.
When I explain why I like Linux, I like the freedom, I like the ability to do whatever I want. I like how it's open source, I like how it's a community, right? But that's not really why I like Linux. The reason I like Linux is because it reminds me of who I am. I like to think of myself as a person who builds and fixes stuff. And using Linux is me almost telling myself, yeah, you are a person who fixes and builds stuff. I don't use Mac because I'm not an artist. As with a lot of Linux users, I was very anti-Apple for a lot of my life. I thought they were like the opposite of what I wanted to be, or what I thought of as myself. They were bougie, they were all closed up and everything. But I think we should start thinking about what the operating systems really say. If you're just getting a computer, more than likely you're getting a Windows. So let's not talk about Windows much, because it's such a big market leader that I don't think you could compare Mac OS or any Linux distro to Windows fairly. But we can probably compare Mac OS to Linux distros. They don't have a huge market share, but they hold a significant power over how operating systems are viewed. So, who uses a Mac? I don't use a Mac. When I think about the people who use a Mac, I think of usually people who are more artsy than I am. I like to think of myself as having some artistic capabilities, but I feel like Mac users are usually more artsy-fartsy than I am. I think of them as more stylish, maybe? Stylistic. They have a certain way they like stuff done, that sort of thing. They like a closed, stable system, that sort of thing, right? What about for Linux users? See, the big problem with Linux users is there's just so many distros. I know that's a great thing about Linux users, but if you're trying to sell to a market, you're giving people too much choice with Linux distros. If you go to Windows, you basically have Windows Home, and then you got enterprise levels and everything, but all of the Windows operating systems are basically the same operating system. Same goes for Mac. I don't know if Mac has enterprise level, right? But all Mac OSs are pretty similar, right? You can't say the same about Linux distros. Linux distros are much more personalized to the type of people that want that distro or built that distro. But we do have some really cool options. Some distros are built for artists, basically, where they can personalize everything. And some are built for, let's face it, hackers like Kali, or for programmers, or that kind of stuff. See, I think we should be comfortable with where Linux is right now, and we should be happy with what Linux is right now. Because I think a Linux user sort of looks like this. A person who sort of has something to this. It might be different levels. It might be they have a screwdriver or like a little drawer that they keep with random knickknacks that they work on. Or they could be people with a giant workshop that they build stuff with, right? I think Linux users should acknowledge what we really are. We are builders. I wouldn't even call us engineers because I feel like some of us are engineers and some of us are like backyard scrap builders. We're not the same, but we're both builders. So I recently made a video about how to get people into using Linux. Hopefully I can put it in one of the thingamabobs. But in that video I said, start them with Ubuntu. But I also immediately after that said, I know that a lot of people wouldn't like that. Because I knew that people no longer care for Ubuntu that much. But I think part of the reason why we won't ever get Linux as a mainstream option is because distros are almost cannibalistic in a way, right? Where every time a new distro comes out, we're not bringing a lot more people into Linux. We're just taking users from one distro and then pulling them over, right? It's like the story about the crabs in the bucket, where if they all just worked together, they could have probably gotten out of the bucket. But since all the crabs are pulling each other down, none of the crabs get out, right? The problem is, I think a lot of people want Linux to become the de facto operating system, which I don't see happening. Which is sad, because I will probably use Linux till the day I die. But I don't think Linux, like having multiple distros, that kind of thing, will ever become the norm. I think Chromebook or Chrome OS or Steam OS, those kinds of operating systems have more likely a chance of building market share and stuff, right? Linux is to me almost a reminder of the person I chose to be, the person who I wanted to be when I was a kid. The kid who did look up what Linux distros are, who was curious about that kind of stuff. And I ended up using Linux. I don't think I fundamentally needed Linux in my life. I like Linux in my life, but if that was not an option, I don't think I would have fundamentally changed as a human being. I think I fundamentally would be a guy who likes to fix things. But I think I would be a guy in Windows who moves things around. I would have the widgets and stuff. Anyone remember like from Vista where they would have like the little widgets that said CPU usage and stuff? I think that's like the first sort of step you can take before you become like a Linux user, where you're like, oh, I like this, where it's just shows graphs and stuff. Sorry, that's just a total side tangent. What I'm basically saying is, I don't think Linux is the way it is right now, where there's just unlimited choice, that Linux will probably never become the de facto leader, as it is right now with hundreds of different distros. Now, if there's just like one company like Steam or like Google who makes a distro and they make it big and it's based on Linux, I think that would work. I think it would be the same as Android, where Android is a Linux distro, technically, right? But you don't think of it as Linux, you think of it as Android. I think if someone came out with a Linux distro, but didn't brand themselves as Linux, like if they built it on Linux, it would be fine, right? Mac and Linux are both Unix based, and so they're somewhat similar. But you don't think of them as similar. They evolved from similar things, but they're not the same thing. They're a different species. And I think Linux needs that, where I don't want it to be Google again. I don't want Google to have another distro where they have full control, like with Android. So hopefully it's not Chrome OS. But if it is Chrome OS, it's something, right? But Chrome OS is not Linux. Chrome OS is Linux, but at the same time, if you point at Chrome OS and ask a person what is that, they would say it's Chrome OS. If you point to a Chrome OS and say it's Linux, technically you're correct, but you don't feel like it's correct. Like in your brain, you know it's not the same. because Chrome OS is for students. It's for like light laptop users. It's not for everyone. It's for a specific group. Same with Apple. Windows is everything, and Linux is for builders. I just see a lot of people who are still like, Linux is the future, which I 100% believe Linux is the future. I don't think Linux, as it is the way it is today, is the future. I don't think there's ever going to be a time where you can give humanity 1,000 different distro choices and they're going to be happy making a choice. I think at some point, some big company will come in and they would make a distro. It's no longer going to be called Linux like Chrome OS or Steam OS, but it will be Linux based, and that will be the future. Again, really hope it's not Chromebook OS, because I really don't want Google to get more stuff, right? Hopefully, there's a part of me that's like, oh, hopefully it's Firefox, but Firefox is not big enough. The problem is, no matter which company does it, I'm not going to be 100% happy, because the Linux that I like and the Linux that the people who are currently using it, the builders and the fixers and the breakers of stuff use, is the free open source, the pick whatever you want, do whatever you want sort of thing. But that's also the reason why it won't be the biggest thing, right? We are a niche product. And I think we should be happy with the product that we have right now. Who do you think is going to be the one to bring the new Linux distro? Because right now the two contenders are Chromebook and SteamOS, right? Which I feel like SteamOS isn't really a competitor. It's more of a games console sort of style thing. Chromebook is the closest, but I feel like Chromebook is, again, very niche down. There's a part of me that it's almost like Android's going to be it. This might be a little bit out there, but I feel like ARM processors are going to become the new standard in a few decades, right? Where even our desktops run ARM or stuff like that, right? And I feel like if we do that, Android really has a chance of becoming the new desktop operating system. Obviously, it's going to be changed. Hopefully, someone else gets involved. But I feel like a version of Android might become the Linux for everyone, because it just already has the market share. This is good corn. Oh yeah. Like the video, subscribe, that sort of stuff, right? If you want, I don't really care. Also, people should eat corn from the can more.